A black man in a plain jacket sat in seat 1A of first class on a flight from New York to Zurich. When premium meals were served to every passenger around him, the attendant glanced at her screen and said, "Sorry, your meal isn't in the system." No explanation, no apology, just a dry sandwich on his tray. He sent one message. 10 minutes after landing, the entire crew was suspended. His name was Darius Bennett. He was 38 years old, and if you saw him walking through JFK that morning, you would not have looked twice. He wore a dark canvas jacket, a plain gray t-shirt, and a pair of clean white sneakers. No watch worth mentioning on his wrist, no luggage tags from designer brands. Nothing about him said first class. That was by design. Darius had spent the better part of 15 years building something most people in his tax bracket liked to talk about at cocktail parties. He ran a private equity fund, one that had quietly accumulated positions in transportation logistics and commercial aviation. His name rarely appeared in headlines. His face had never been on the cover of a magazine, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He was also a single father. His daughter Amara was 7. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. 3 years ago, Darius's wife Elaine had lost her battle with an autoimmune disease that had slowly taken everything from her, her energy, her mobility, and finally, her life. Darius had been at her side through every hospital visit, every sleepless night, every moment when the doctor stopped making promises. When she died, he made one promise to himself: Amara would never feel like she was missing anything. Before boarding the flight that morning, Darius had sat in the terminal lounge and made a video call. Amara's face filled the screen, bright and grinning. She was at home with Elaine's mother, Gloria, who had moved in after the funeral and never left. "Daddy, look." Amara held up a crayon, drawing a lopsided airplane flying over what appeared to be a mountain made entirely of chocolate. "That's beautiful, baby. That's you going to Switzerland, and that's the chocolate you're bringing me." Darius smiled. "I haven't forgotten. The biggest box I can find. Promise. Promise." Gloria's voice came from somewhere off-screen. "You be safe now, Darius, and eat something on that plane. You're too thin." He told them both he loved them, ended the call, and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. That warmth, Amara's laughter, Gloria's fussing stayed with him as he walked down the jet bridge. It was still with him when he settled into seat 1A, the window seat in the front row of first class. It would not last. The cabin was quiet in the way that expensive spaces always are. Soft lighting, wide leather seats, the faint hum of pre-flight preparation. Darius counted 7 other passengers in the first-class cabin. Every single one of them was white. Every single one of them wore something that telegraphed money: a tailored blazer, a silk scarf, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. Darius noticed this the way he always noticed it. Not with surprise, not with anger, just with the quiet awareness of a man who had learned long before he could articulate it that certain spaces came with invisible gates. A flight attendant moved through the cabin before takeoff, greeting passengers with rehearsed warmth. She stopped at each row, made eye contact, offered a glass of champagne or sparkling water. Her name tag read Karen. When she reached Darius, something shifted. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people would not catch unless they had spent a lifetime calibrating themselves to it. Her smile did not quite reach her eyes. Her gaze dropped to his jacket, his sneakers, then back up. She did not offer champagne. "Can I see your boarding pass?" she asked. Darius pulled it up on his phone and showed her. She studied it for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded once and moved on without a word. He leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. The flight lifted off on schedule. For the first 2 hours, nothing remarkable happened. Darius read through documents on his tablet, reviewed quarterly projections, and responded to a few emails from Marcus, his chief of staff. The Zurich meeting was significant, a potential acquisition that would expand the fund's European portfolio. But Darius had done this enough times that significant no longer made him nervous. Then the meal service began. A cart rolled down the aisle and the cabin came alive with the quiet theater of first-class dining. Linen napkins were unfolded. Wine glasses were filled. The passengers around Darius received their pre-ordered meals: seared salmon with champagne butter sauce, caviar blinis, a selection of artisanal cheeses. The woman across the aisle received her plate with a smile and a compliment to the attendant. The man behind Darius was offered a second glass of Bordeaux before he had finished his first. Karen worked the cabin with efficiency and charm. She laughed at a joke from the gentleman in 2B. She recommended a dessert wine to the couple in row 3. She was by every visible measure excellent at her job. Then she reached row 1. She stopped in front of Darius, glanced at the screen on her service tablet, and her expression flattened. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying the kind of politeness that was worse than rudeness because it pretended to be something it was not. "Your meal doesn't appear to be in the system." Darius looked at her. "I selected the salmon when I booked." Karen shook her head. "There's nothing here under your seat assignment. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't have a meal for you." She did not offer to check again. She did not call a colleague. She did not apologize with any sincerity. Instead, she reached beneath the cart and placed a plastic-wrapped sandwich on his tray table, the kind of sandwich that belonged in a vending machine, not in a cabin where other passengers were eating caviar off porcelain. "This is what I can offer," she said, and moved on. Darius stared at the sandwich. Turkey and American cheese on white bread, the edges already curling. A small packet of mustard sat beside it like an afterthought. He did not say a word. Around him, the other passengers noticed. A woman in row 2 glanced over her shoulder, then quickly looked away. The man in 1B, gray-haired, wearing a cashmere sweater, studied Darius with an expression that was not quite sympathy and not quite suspicion. It was the look of someone trying to figure out whether a mistake had been made, and if so, whose mistake it was. Darius felt it. He felt all of it, not as a sharp pain that had dulled years ago. It was something heavier, a weight he had carried since he was 12 years old, walking into a department store in a nice neighborhood and feeling the security guard's eyes follow him down every aisle. It was the same weight he had felt at 22, showing up to a job interview in his best suit and watching the interviewer's eyebrows lift with surprise when he walked through the door. It was the weight of a lifetime of moments like this, moments where someone looked at him and decided before a single word was spoken that he did not belong. It did not make him angry anymore. It made him tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He unwrapped the sandwich. He took a bite. He chewed slowly, deliberately, and swallowed. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened his encrypted messaging app. He typed 3 words to Marcus: "Initiate service audit." He pressed send, set the phone face down on the armrest, and took another bite of the sandwich. Somewhere on the ground, in an office building in Lower Manhattan, Marcus read the message. He had worked with Darius long enough to know that those 3 words were not a request. They were an instruction. And when Darius gave an instruction in that tone, calm, measured, stripped of emotion, it meant something had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Marcus closed his laptop, picked up his phone, and began making calls. Back on the plane, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, Darius finished the sandwich. He folded the plastic wrapper, neatly placed it on the tray, and looked out the window at the endless dark below. He thought about Amara's drawing, the lopsided airplane, the chocolate mountain. He thought about the world she would grow up in, the spaces she would walk into, the eyes that would follow her the way they had always followed him. He did not know exactly how this would end, but he knew how it would begin, and it had already begun. The hours over the Atlantic stretched long and quiet. Darius kept his tablet open on his lap, but he was no longer reading. He was watching. It was something he had learned to do early in life, to sit still and observe, to let a room reveal itself while everyone else assumed he was not paying attention. People told you who they were if you gave them enough time. You did not have to ask. You just had to watch. Karen moved through the first-class cabin like a woman who believed she was being watched by the right people and ignored by the rest. She refilled glasses without being asked. She remembered names. When the woman in row 2 mentioned that her neck was stiff, Karen brought a heated towel and draped it across her shoulders with the gentleness of a friend rather than an employee. The man in 1B received a second dessert course, a chocolate souffle that was apparently not on the standard menu, along with Karen's personal recommendation for a restaurant in Zurich's Old Town. She was attentive. She was warm. She was everything a first-class flight attendant was supposed to be. To everyone, except Darius. After the meal trays were cleared, the cabin lights dimmed to a warm amber. Most passengers reclined their seats and settled into the drowsy rhythm of a transatlantic flight. Darius remained upright, his eyes half closed but still aware. That was when the young man across the aisle pressed his call button. He sat in seat 1C, mid-20s white, wearing a faded college hoodie and jeans. His sneakers were scuffed in a way that suggested carelessness rather than poverty. He had boarded with a backpack slung over one shoulder and had spent most of the flight watching a movie on his laptop with his feet propped on the ottoman. Karen appeared within 30 seconds. Her entire demeanor shifted when she reached him. Her shoulders dropped, her smile widened, and her voice took on the easy warmth of someone greeting a younger brother home from college. "What can I get for you?" she asked, leaning one hand on the back of his seat. The young man asked if there was anything else to drink. Karen ran through a list of cocktails, an old-fashioned gin and tonic, a whiskey sour, describing each one as if she were reading from a menu at a speakeasy. The young man laughed and said he would try the old-fashioned. Karen told him she made a great one and disappeared toward the galley with a wink. When she returned, she handed him the drink and lingered for a moment, asking where he was headed in Zurich. "A ski trip," the young man said. Karen told him about a lodge she had visited once in the Alps, and the two of them traded travel stories like old friends while Darius sat 6 feet away, invisible. Darius watched the entire exchange from his seat by the window. He did not move. He did not react. But something inside him shifted, not with surprise, because there was nothing surprising about it. It was the confirmation of something he had already known. The difference in how he had been treated was not about clothing. The young man in 1C was dressed more casually than Darius. His sneakers were dirtier. His posture was sloppier. But Karen had never asked to see his boarding pass. Karen had never questioned whether he belonged. The difference was not the jacket. It was not the sneakers. It was not the absence of a Rolex or a monogrammed briefcase. It was his skin. Darius reached up and pressed his own call button. The soft chime sounded above his seat. He waited. 1 minute, 2, 3. Karen walked past his row twice, once bringing a warm towel to the young man in 1C, once returning to the galley with an empty tray. Both times she did not look in his direction. At the 5-minute mark, Darius pressed the button again. Karen finally appeared at his row. The warmth that had been in her voice 30 seconds earlier was gone. Her lips were pressed together and her eyebrows carried the faint suggestion of inconvenience, as though he had interrupted something important. "What do you need?" she asked. Not, "What can I get for you?" the phrasing she had used with every other passenger. Just, "What do you need?" clipped, direct, stripped of courtesy. "A glass of water," Darius said. Karen brought it back a minute later. She set the glass on his tray table without a word and turned away before he could say thank you, not that he was going to. Darius picked up the glass and drank. The water was lukewarm. He set it down and turned back to the window. Somewhere beneath the clouds, the ocean was moving in the dark, vast, indifferent, older than anything happening in this cabin. He found a strange comfort in that. His phone buzzed. Marcus had sent a long email with the subject line, "Preliminary Findings Service Audit Background." Darius opened it and began reading. Marcus worked fast. Within 2 hours of receiving the message, he had pulled internal records from the airline's customer service database records that Darius's fund had access to as part of their due diligence ahead of the upcoming acquisition. What Marcus found was not a single incident, it was a pattern. The flight attendant identified by employee number as Karen Whitfield had been the subject of 3 formal complaints in the past 2 years. All 3 complaints came from passengers of color who had flown first or business class. The details varied, but the substance was the same. One complaint described a black businessman who was told his pre-ordered meal was unavailable, while every white passenger in the same cabin received theirs without issue. Another described a Latino couple who were repeatedly skipped during drink service. The third came from an Indian-American doctor who was asked twice to show her boarding pass after she had already been seated. 3 complaints, 3 passengers, 3 separate flights, and in every case the airline had followed the same procedure. The complaint was logged into the system, assigned a reference number, and filed. No follow-up investigation was initiated. No disciplinary hearing was convened. No one in management ever contacted the passengers to acknowledge what they had experienced. The report sat in a database like receipts in a shoebox, technically accounted for, practically forgotten. It was the kind of institutional negligence that did not require malice to sustain itself. It only required indifference. Someone had read those complaints and decided they were not worth the trouble, and because no one had ever forced the issue, Karen Whitfield had continued to fly, continued to serve, and continued to decide who in her cabin deserved her best and who deserved a sandwich in plastic wrap. But Marcus had found something else, something that turned the situation from an embarrassment into evidence. He had pulled the meal service logs from Darius's flight. The same system Karen had claimed showed no record of his order. The logs told a different story. Darius's meal had been entered correctly at the time of booking. Salmon, seat 1A, confirmed. It had never been deleted. It had never been lost. It was there the entire time, sitting in the system exactly where it was supposed to be. Karen had not made a mistake. She had made a choice. Darius read the email twice. Then he closed it and stared at the seat back in front of him for a long time. He was not shocked. That was the part that bothered him most, the absence of shock. He had spent his entire adult life building something from nothing, proving himself in rooms where no one expected him to succeed, and still, at 38, sitting in a seat he had paid for eating a sandwich he had not ordered. The world found ways to remind him that none of it mattered. Not the fund, not the portfolio, not the 15 years of work. A woman looked at him and saw a man who did not belong, and that was enough. His phone buzzed again. This time it was not Marcus. Gloria had sent a photo. Amara was asleep on the couch, her small body curled around a stuffed bear that she had named Captain Honey. Her braids were messy against the pillow, and one sock had come off and was hanging from her foot. Gloria had added a short message beneath the photo. Fell asleep watching her movie. Sweet dreams to you, too. Darius looked at that photo for a long time. He zoomed in on Amara's face, the softness of it, the complete absence of worry. She was 7. She still believed that people were mostly good, that the world was mostly fair, and that her father could fix anything. He thought about Elaine. He thought about a night years ago when they had walked into a restaurant in the Upper East Side for their anniversary. The hostess had looked at them, a black couple in a place where black couples were rare, and asked if they had a reservation, her tone implying that they could not possibly. Elaine had smiled, given her name, and been seated without incident. But afterward in the car, she had been quiet for a long time before she finally said, "I don't want to spend my life proving I deserve to sit at a table I already paid for." She never raised her voice about it. She never made speeches. But she carried it the same way Darius carried it, deep, quiet, heavy. And when she got sick, when the disease began taking pieces of her one by one, Darius sometimes wondered if part of what wore her down was not just the illness, but the lifetime of small cuts that came before it. The 1,000 moments of being measured by the wrong scale, of being asked to justify her presence in rooms she had earned her way into. He would never know for certain. but he carried that question alongside everything else. He looked at Amara's sleeping face on his phone screen and thought about the day she would be old enough to walk into a room and feel that weight for the first time. The day someone would look at her and decide before she opened her mouth that she was less. It was coming. He could not stop it. No amount of money, no fund, no portfolio could stop it. But he could make sure that at least one airline would not be the place where it happened. He forwarded Marcus's email to the fund's legal counsel with a single line, "Compile full report. Send directly to the airline's executive leadership. Tonight." Marcus called back within 20 minutes. Darius answered with the phone pressed against the window, his voice low enough that no one in the cabin could hear. Marcus confirmed that the legal team had packaged the findings, the 3 prior complaints, the meal log evidence, and a formal request for an immediate service audit under the governance rights granted by the fund's equity stake. The fund was not a minority investor. It was the lead partner in a consortium that collectively held enough shares to demand board-level action. The acquisition deal that Darius was flying to Zurich to finalize would increase that position even further. In plain terms, Darius Bennett had more influence over the airline's future than anyone currently sitting on its executive committee realized, and his chief of staff had just delivered a report that made it impossible for them to look the other way. "The report is already in the CEO's inbox," Marcus said through the phone, "and the general counsel's, and the head of HR's. I CC'd all 3. Darius listened without responding for a moment. Then he asked one question. "Did you include the meal logs?" "Every line," Marcus said. "Her order screen, the booking confirmation, the system timestamp. The meal was there. She skipped it." Darius ended the call. He lowered the phone to his lap and let out a long breath through his nose. Outside the window, the first faint glow of European dawn was beginning to color the horizon, a thin line of orange beneath a dark sky. The plane had crossed the Atlantic. Zurich was less than 2 hours away. Darius thought about what was waiting for him on the ground. The meeting, the contracts, the handshake that would close a deal worth hundreds of millions. That was the reason he had boarded this flight. That was the reason he was in seat 1A. But the report Marcus had sent would arrive before he did. And by the time the wheels touched the runway, the people running the airline would already know 2 things: that one of their largest investors had been treated like an intruder on their own aircraft, and that the evidence was documented, time-stamped, and impossible to dismiss. Darius closed his eyes. Not to sleep, he was far past sleep now. He closed them because he needed a moment with the dark, with the quiet, with the low hum of the engines carrying him forward. He thought about Amara's drawing again. The airplane, the chocolate mountain, the simple, beautiful world of a 7-year-old who believed that when her daddy got on a plane, the only thing worth worrying about was whether he would remember the chocolate. He opened his eyes when the captain's voice came through the speakers. Calm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Zurich. Please return your seats to the upright position." The cabin stirred. Passengers stretched, folded their blankets, tucked their devices away. Karen moved through the aisle one final time, collecting glasses and offering warm towels. She stopped at every row. She smiled at every face. When she reached row 1, she collected Darius's empty water glass without making eye contact. She did not offer a towel. She did not say a word. Darius watched her walk away. He folded his tray table, straightened his jacket, and looked out the window as the Swiss Alps emerged through the clouds, jagged and white and ancient. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud. The plane taxied to the gate. The seatbelt sign went dark. Passengers stood, reached for overhead bins, checked their phones, the normal choreography of arrival. Karen and the rest of the crew moved toward the front of the aircraft, straightening their uniforms, fixing their smiles. They lined up near the exit door the way they always did, a row of polished professional faces ready to say goodbye. The door opened, but the people standing on the other side of the jet bridge were not the usual ground crew. There were 5 of them. 3 wore the corporate badges of the airline's Human Resources Division. 2 were security personnel in dark blazers. One of the HR representatives held a clipboard. On it was a printed list. Every crew member's name was on it. The crew saw them before the passengers did. Karen was standing closest to the door, her shoulders squared, her smile rehearsed and ready. She had done this 1,000 times, the polite farewell, the practiced nod, the "thank you for flying with us," that she could deliver in her sleep. But when the jet bridge door swung open and the 5 figures came into view, her smile did not fade so much as freeze in place, the way a screen freezes when the system behind it stops working. The 3 HR representatives wore the airline's corporate lanyards over dark business suits. One of them, a tall woman with silver-framed glasses and a clipboard pressed against her chest, stepped forward first. The 2 security personnel stood a few feet behind, hands folded in front of them, faces unreadable. The tall woman addressed the crew in a voice that was quiet, but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. She did not raise it. She did not need to. "I need all crew members assigned to this flight to remain on board. No one is to exit the aircraft until you've been individually briefed." The words landed like a door closing. The other flight attendants, 2 women and a man who had worked the business and economy cabins, exchanged confused glances. One of them opened her mouth to ask a question, but the tall woman had already turned to speak with the lead security officer, her clipboard angled just enough that the printed list on it was visible. Passengers had begun filing out of first class. The man in 1B gray-haired cashmere sweater slowed as he passed the HR team, his brow creased with curiosity. The woman from row 2 glanced sideways but kept walking. The young man in 1C adjusted his backpack strap and barely looked up from his phone. None of them understood what they were seeing. None of them needed to. This was not for them. Darius was the last passenger to leave first class. He stood from his seat, slowly reached into the overhead bin for his carry-on bag, and pulled his canvas jacket off the back of the seat. He put it on without hurrying. He did not check his phone. He did not look toward the crew. He walked up the aisle the same way he had walked down it 8 hours earlier, steady, unhurried, quiet. When he reached the front of the cabin, the crew was still standing near the exit door, their faces caught somewhere between confusion and the first cold touch of understanding. Karen saw him. Their eyes met for less than a second, but in that second, something changed in her face. It was not recognition. She had never known who he was. It was something worse. It was the beginning of a question she did not yet have the answer to. Why were these people here? Why now? And why was the man in 1A, the man she had given a vending machine sandwich to, the man she had ignored for 8 hours, the man whose call button she had let ring walking past her with the calm of someone who already knew she did not say goodbye to him? She did not say anything. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Darius walked past her and into the jet bridge. Behind him, he heard the tall woman's voice again, steadier now, more official. "This is a formal notification. All crew members on this flight are being placed on immediate administrative suspension pending a full-service conduct investigation. You will each receive individual notice within the hour." He did not turn around. The jet bridge was long and slightly uphill the way they always were, and Darius walked it alone. His footsteps echoed against the ribbed metal floor. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. At the end of the bridge, the terminal opened up wide, bright, filled with the ambient noise of an international airport at morning. Darius stepped into the terminal and kept walking. He did not feel victorious. He searched for that feeling the way someone might search for a lighter in a dark room, running their hand along the edges of things hoping to find it. But it was not there. What was there instead was something older and quieter, the deep exhaustion of a man who had just been reminded again that the world he moved through was not built for him, and that the act of forcing it to change even in one small corner required a kind of energy that left nothing behind. Suspending a flight crew did not undo the feeling of being looked through. It did not erase the way Karen's eyes had passed over him like he was a smudge on the window. It did not take back the sandwich or the lukewarm water or the 5 minutes he had sat with his call button lit while she traded cocktail recipes with a kid in a college hoodie. Those moments had happened. They lived in him now, alongside every other moment, like them filed away in a place he could not empty no matter how many audits he initiated, no matter how many reports his legal team sent. He found a quiet corner near the arrivals hall and sat down on a metal bench. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Marcus. All confirmed. Crew suspended effective immediately. Airline CEO has authorized a company-wide service audit, all routes, all classes. Anti-discrimination training protocols are being reviewed by an outside firm. Internal complaint system flagged for overhaul. Board will be briefed at next session. Darius read the message. He read it again. Then he locked his phone and set it on the bench beside him. He should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Satisfaction. The knowledge that something broken was being fixed, that the 3 passengers who had filed complaints before him, the black businessman, the Latino couple, the Indian-American doctor, might finally see their words treated as more than data in an unread file. But all he felt was hollow. Not empty hollow, the way a bell is hollow. Something had rung through him, and now the sound was fading, and what remained was just the shape of it. He sat on that bench for a long time, watching travelers move through the terminal, families, businessmen, couples, tour groups. All of them going somewhere, all of them carrying things no one else could see. That evening, Darius sat in his hotel room on the 14th floor of a building overlooking the Limit River. The city of Zurich glowed below him, amber streetlights reflecting off dark water, the spires of old churches lit against a navy sky. It was beautiful in the way that European cities are beautiful at night, quiet, composed, ancient. His tablet was open on the desk with the acquisition documents loaded ready for tomorrow's meeting, but he had not looked at them in over an hour. Instead, he was sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hand, waiting for a video call to connect. Amara's face appeared on the screen, slightly blurry at first, then sharp. She was sitting on the living room couch, the same couch where she had fallen asleep with Captain Honey a few hours earlier. Her braids were fresh, which meant Gloria had redone them before bed. She was wearing pajamas with little stars on them, and she was grinning the way only a 7-year-old who has been allowed to stay up past bedtime can grin. "Daddy!" she said loud enough that Gloria's voice came from the background, gently reminding her it was late. "Hey, baby girl," Darius said. His voice was softer than it had been all day, softer than it had been with Marcus, with the legal team, with anyone. Amara leaned into the screen. "Was the plane ride fun?" Darius looked at his daughter's face, the wide brown eyes that were her mother's, the stubborn jaw that was his, and felt the tiredness shift into something else. Something that hurt more, but mattered more, too. "It wasn't great," he said, "but I did something right today." Amara tilted her head the way she always did when she was trying to understand something that adults said. She did not ask what he meant. She had already moved on to the only thing that mattered. "Did you get my chocolate yet?" Darius smiled. It was the first real smile he had allowed himself since the plane. "Not yet. Tomorrow. I promised, remember." "You promised," Amara confirmed, pointing at the screen with the seriousness of a judge issuing a ruling. Then she yawned, a wide, unstoppable yawn that made her whole face scrunch, and Darius told her to go to sleep. "I love you, Daddy. I love you more." The screen went dark. Darius set the phone on the nightstand and walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, quiet and lit and indifferent to everything that had happened on a plane somewhere over the Atlantic. It had started with a sandwich, a dry plastic-wrapped turkey and American cheese sandwich that should have been a salmon dinner. A small thing, the kind of thing most people would have swallowed along with their pride and never mentioned again. But sometimes a small thing is just the visible edge of something much larger. Sometimes the sandwich is not about the sandwich. It is about the woman who decided in the time it took to glance at a man's skin and his sneakers and his plain canvas jacket that he was not worth the plate in front of her. The people on that flight believed Darius Bennett did not belong in first class. They believed it because he did not look the way they expected a first-class passenger to look. And Karen Whitfield believed it enough to skip his meal, ignore his call button, and serve him with the kind of cold efficiency that said louder than words that she had already decided who he was. What none of them knew was that the man sitting in 1A was the same man whose signature could reshape the airline's board, whose fund held enough equity to force a vote of no confidence, whose single text message had set into motion a chain of events that would change the way the company trained its employees, handled its complaints, and treated the passengers who trusted it with their time and their dignity. But that was not why Darius had sent the message. He had sent it because of a 7-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and a stuffed bear named Captain Honey. Because one day, that girl would be old enough to board a plane by herself. She would sit in a seat she had earned, and someone might look at her and see nothing but her skin. And when that day came, Darius wanted to know that he had done everything in his power to make sure at least one airline had changed before she walked through its doors. He could not fix the world. He knew that. What he carried inside him was not the kind of thing that could be set down. It would follow him into the next room, the next flight, the next meeting, where someone's eyes would flicker with surprise when he walked through the door. But he could make sure that the people who had the power to treat others with dignity were held accountable when they chose not to. He stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the lights of Zurich. Then he turned off the lamp, lay down on the bed, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow there would be contracts to sign and hands to shake. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight, somewhere across the ocean, his daughter was sleeping with stars on her pajamas and a bear in her arms, dreaming about chocolate mountains and airplanes. And that was enough. Never judge a person's worth by what you see on the surface, because sometimes the one you overlook is the one with the power to change the entire system. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one who speaks the loudest, but the one who stays quiet long enough to act at exactly the right moment. If this story made you think about someone who deserved better than the way they were treated, or if you have ever been that someone, leave a comment. Tell me your story. And if you believe more people need to hear this, share it. Sometimes a single voice is all it takes to start a conversation that changes everything. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.